Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful creepy little human being you. Welcome to my channel and welcome to today's Morbid makeup video. I'm so happy we could meet like this. I'm so happy that somehow in all this mess, you and I were able to find each other on this beautiful little earthly rotation. My name is Brittany or BRATTERSTEIN, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing John List, a family annihilator that murdered his wife, his 3 children, and his mother in 1971 in a case that's commonly referred to as the Breeze-Knoll murders, and then evaded capture for nearly 20 years. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing the bell because I put out a new Morbid makeup video every week, and I would love it if you would come and hang out with us and become one of the Brat Pack. Become one of us. One of us. One of us. And now that we're done with that pesky but totally necessary self-promotion, the case. This is a case that I'm sure you have heard of, even if you don't remember hearing about it, because this is a case that was featured on an episode of Forensic Files. There was always reruns of the episode. If you are into true crime and you watch Forensic Files, which I'm sure you did, you probably saw it because he was caught, John List, in a very unique way when a forensic sculptor sculpted a bust of Homeboy's face that was like spot on. I used to see reruns of this episode all the time, and it's one of the few true crime cases that actually interests my husband, which if you've been here before, you may know, my husband doesn't have an interest in true crime, so any case that I can get him, like, engaged in is important and memorable to me. But you know what, let's just get into the case. So come, gather around, and let me tell you the story of John List, a family annihilator, a D-bag, and a failure. John Emil List was born September 17th, 1925, making him a Virgo. He was born in Bay City, Michigan, and he was the only child to parents John, also named John. Daddy was named John as well, and he was a Sunday school teacher, and mother, Alma, who was a bit of an overbearing, overprotective, and controlling mother of young John Emil List. In 1943, when John List was barely an adult, he enlisted in the United States Army, and he was a lab technician in World War II. After being discharged in 1946, John enrolled in the University of Michigan, where he acquired degrees in both business administration and accounting. So he was a smart dude, good with numbers, you know, fine person, I guess, from what we know, but not that fine, because we know what he went off to do, so not that fine. In 1950, the Korean War, which was a war between North and South Korea, well, it started to get more serious, and the US decided, okay, we got to get involved and help with this war. So because of that, John ended up being recalled to active duty. But this time the Army was like, oh, you're good at business and accounting, and they assigned him to the finance corps in the Army. To me, all of this sounds pretty unideal for like a young dude in his 20s to be stuck in some war, but apparently for him it was sort of like lucky, because while on active duty and being stationed in Virginia, John actually met a woman that would one day be his wife. She was a widow and a single mother named Helen Morris Taylor. Helen had 1 daughter, as I said, she was a single mother, and this was a little girl named Brenda. And now, Brenda did end up growing up with John as her stepfather throughout her life, but fortunately for her, at the time that John committed the Breeze-Knoll murders and killed her whole entire family, she was already older, married, and moved out of the house at the time, but anyways, moving on. So John and Helen hit it off, and the two ended up being married on December 1st, 1951, when John was just 25 years old. So in the beginning of their relationship, the couple moved around a lot. They went from Northern California to Detroit, then to Michigan, where John got a job at a paper company, the Michael Scott paper company. No, but a paper company. And while in Michigan working at this paper company, this is when the couple decided they wanted to start a family. And while in Michigan, the two had 3 children together. Though John was well educated and like a smart dude, the reason the family had to move around so much is because John lacked social skills. He was really bad at like talking to people, communicating with people, being like a fun, cool, hip dude. So he often lost his jobs, and that's why they had to keep bouncing around, because he kept losing his jobs, and then they'd have to move to a new area where he could find a new job. The family moved around a few more times, once to Rochester, New York, where John got a job for Xerox, but eventually they finally settled down in their final place that they would live and spend the rest of their years in 1965 at the Breeze Knoll. This was a 19-bedroom Victorian mansion located at 431 Hillside Avenue in Westfield, New Jersey. The family was able to afford this house and move into this house because John had accepted an accounting job at a bank in Jersey City. Now, because this house was massive, like 19 bedrooms, first off, I've said this before, but like, who needs that many bedrooms? Who wants that many bedrooms? It's a lot of places for ghosts to hang out or burglars to just be hiding. Like, no, thank you. Before I go to bed, I have to check my closets. I have to lock all the doors and windows. That's like a lot of maintenance. But anyway, they moved into this big old house and they're like, okay, now that Brenda has moved out and it's just the 5 of us, they decided that not only would John, his wife, and 3 children move into this house, but he also moved in his mother, Alma. So they all lived in the Breeze Knoll as a one big happy family. So now we're going to jump into our handy dandy time machine and we're going to head to November 9th, 1971, when 46-year-old John List decided he was going to murder his entire family. Now, why did John List want to do this? We're going to get there. But first, let's talk about the actual crime. That day, John's kids left for school, and while his kids were out of the house, he took this opportunity to murder his wife, who he had been married to for nearly 20 years. He shot 46-year-old Helen in the back of the head while she sat at the kitchen table. He then climbed up the stairs to go to his mother's apartment, which they had just turned the whole attic floor into an apartment for Alma, and he shot his mother, 84-year-old Alma, in the face above her left eye. John List then waited in the home for his children to come back from school, and when his daughter, 16-year-old Patricia, and his youngest son, 13-year-old Frederick, returned from school that day, he shot them both in the back of the head in the kitchen. So John found himself with a little bit of time now because his eldest son, John Jr., because he's the third John, was participating in a soccer game at the Westfield High School. So he proceeded to make lunch in the kitchen where he had just murdered his wife and 2 children. Once he finished his lunch, he's like, Mama, he finished his lunch. He then got in his car, he drove over to the bank, and he closed out both his and his mother's bank accounts, withdrawing all the money, before then heading to his son's high school to pick him up. When they arrived back home, a fight broke out between John Jr., the father, and John Jr., the son, and because of the fight and because his son was resisting and like surviving longer, he shot his oldest son, who was 15 years old, a total of 10 times. John then moved the bodies of his wife and his 3 children to the mansion's ballroom. What kind of life is that? Anyway, and when they were in there, he placed their bodies on top of sleeping bags. And some reports said they were in the sleeping bags, some said on top. I looked at the crime scene photos and it looks like they were kind of like on top, but some of them were wrapped in. And I imagine he put them on the sleeping bags to stop the blood from getting everywhere. John left the body of his mother in her attic apartment because she was, and I quote, too heavy to move. John then proceeded to say a prayer over the bodies of his dead family and then sat down to write a 5-page letter. It was more a confession to his pastor because he was a deeply religious man. And he said in this letter that the reason he killed his family is because he wanted to save their souls. He thought that they were moving away from God and that if he didn't kill them now at their current place, then they might never be granted access to heaven because of their evil ways. John said that the world was getting more and more evil, and this was due to a lack of God, and that the whole world was going to Satan. And he thought that eventually his family would stop going to church, and like, this absolutely could not happen in his eyes. And he also was incredibly disapproving of his daughter's growing interest in becoming an actress, because he saw this profession as an immoral profession. John then proceeded to clean up his crime scenes, all the different places where he killed his family, and then went to sleep, you know, chilling after killing. And the next morning he woke up and decided, okay, I need to hide my identity. So he goes to every family photo in the house and he cuts his face out of the photo. So it's just like a photo of the family with a missing hole where his face had once been, because he knew that they'd want to release his photo to the media and get it out there, and he wanted to stop them from identifying him. John then turned on all the lights in the house. He dropped the thermostat down as low as it could go, made the house incredibly cold. He turned on the radio to a religious station and made it so they had like an intercom system because they lived in a freaking mansion, and made it so that the music broadcast over the intercom, and then he left. John's family went undiscovered for a month, and John was not seen again for 17 years. So apparently the reason that John was able to get this month head start and no one was like, where's his family, is because, so even though John's kids were like relatively popular, like well-liked kids, you know, as kids are, John himself and his wife and his mother were more homebodies, more reclusive, and John himself was like hella antisocial, so it wasn't unusual for neighbors not to really see them around. And in addition to that, John had taken steps to ensure people wouldn't come looking for him and his family. He had contacted his kids' schools and he had informed them that his whole family was going to be going away for a little while because his wife Helen's mother was sick and they were going to go be with her during her illness. Now, this was a lie, but it wasn't totally a lie, because apparently Helen's mother was sick at this time, and Helen's mother there's hair, always. Helen's mother had planned to come to the mansion and to see her family, but she got sick, so she canceled her trip. And apparently this was a good thing, because later John said that if she had been there, she would have been his 6th victim. So she was lucky. But obviously, you know, the family didn't go visit Helen's mother, but because of this excuse, John was able to get away without anyone wondering what was happening for an entire month. Like, no one knew anything was wrong for a whole month. So eventually, though, a neighbor did get suspicious, because they were like looking over and they're like, huh, man, those list people, they really have their lights on all day and all night. But then after a while, the lights started to burn out one by one, and they're like, okay, this is kind of weird. So they contacted the police. So the bodies were quickly discovered once police entered the home through an open window, and the house was dark, vacant, and cold, and in the distance they could hear like a faint sound of music, which is so creepy. When police looked further, they found the bodies of Helen and her 3 children laying on top of the blood-soaked sleeping bags. They also found that there were drag marks from the ballroom to the kitchen where the murders took place, and in the kitchen they found paper bags filled with bloody paper towels and a bloody mop. And in further searching the house, they found Alma's body in her apartment. 2 days later, John List's car was discovered at the John F. Kennedy Airport in New York City, and they were able to determine what date it had been left there because of the parking voucher in the car. But when they looked into it, they didn't find any evidence that he had actually taken a flight. So John List was just gone, vanished without a trace, and with a 1-month head start. Police did all they could to try to find John List. They even enlisted help from the FBI, but eventually, as sometimes these cases do, the case went cold, and it stayed cold for 17 years. But then, a break in the case. In May of 1989, America's Most Wanted decided that they were going to do an episode on the John List case. This is one of those ones that, like, this is one of the oldest, like the longest cold cases that at the time had ever been on America's Most Wanted, but they were like, I really want to see this guy get caught. So they did an episode, and in this episode, they included an age-progressed bust of what John List would look like now after all these years. And this was created by a forensic sculptor named Frank Bender. At this time, what Frank Bender specialized in was helping the police put faces onto skeletal remains to help give victims a face and identify like Jane Does and stuff. But now he was going to help the police figure out what an aged John List might look like, and his sculpture was eerily accurate. Like, when they ended up catching John List, the bust looked exactly like him, down to the pair of glasses that John List might be wearing. Because, okay, Frank Bender wanted to know everything about this man to make, like, the most accurate bust. So he teamed up with a forensic psychologist, and they put together, like, a profile of the type of man that would have to had committed these murders. And they wanted to get, like, what his personality traits would be like now, which would influence the way he would age. And together they determined that John List would likely hide his identity behind a pair of dark, thick, black-rimmed glasses to hide who he was and to hide the fact that he was a failure, because he would want to look more important and more intelligent than he actually was. The bust was featured in the episode, and it looked so much like him that one of John's former neighbors and friends in Colorado was watching the episode and was like, yo, that guy looks just like my old neighbor, Robert Clark. So she called the police and she was like, hey, so that guy was my neighbor. His name is Robert P. Clark, and he just moved to Virginia. So police end up locating this Bob Clark / John List less than 2 weeks after the episode on America's Most Wanted had aired. And at the time that they found him and arrested him, he was wearing the exact same pair of glasses that they had put on the bust on the episode. Like, it was like when he was creating the bust, he was actually looking at John List at the time. It's crazy. Like, the exact same, not like close, the exact same style of glasses. What? So, on June 1st, 1989, John List was arrested at his job in Virginia. And when they arrested him, he completely denied who he was. He was like, nah, dog, my name's Bob Clark. I don't know who this John List character is. Mistaken identity, you got the wrong man. But, you know, after some time in February of 1990, Bob Clark / John List did confess to who he was after being confronted with the evidence that police had. Because even though John had done everything in his power to get rid of all photos of him, there was at least one family photo that police did have, and they had his fingerprints. So, sorry, John. Apparently, John List had lived a regular and unassuming life during his 17 years as a free man. After committing the murders, and John left his car at the airport, and then he caught a train where he traveled to Michigan, and then to Colorado where he settled down. A year after the murders, John had settled down. He had made a life for himself in Denver, Colorado. He had taken the name of Bob Clark and gotten himself a job at a box-making company. He also, in suit, because he loved Jesus, he enrolled? He joined a church, and at this church, he met himself a woman. The woman's name was Dolores, and the two married in 1985. 3 years later, they decided they wanted to move, so they moved from their home in Denver, Colorado to Virginia, where John took a job as an accountant, just like his life before, and his new wife had no idea who he was and what he had done. He told her that his first wife had died of cancer and that he had no children. At his trial, John List said that during the time that he committed the murders, the financial difficulties he was facing had led him to be ashamed of himself, and he didn't want his family to know what a failure he was. He also said that his wife Helen was a raging alcoholic and that she had syphilis that she had gotten from her first husband that she refused to treat, and he just made her sound terrible, dude. Saying that she was overbearing and critical and would verbally abuse him and that his mother did the same. But along with his excuses, he did also shed some light on what happened in his life that led to him committing the murders that he did at Brasenose. Apparently what had happened back in 1971 is John List, who had been an accountant and the family's breadwinner and had moved them into this nice mansion because he had this great job, well, he had lost his job again. Instead of telling his family about this, John hid the fact that he had lost his job, okay? Each morning, he would get up, he'd get ready, and he'd leave the house pretending to go to work, okay? After John left the house each day, he would go to the train station and he would stay there all day. He would hang out, he would read newspapers, he would take a nap, and then at the end of the day, he would just walk in and, you know, act like he had been at work all day. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy, which is just like a lot, right? Like, that's a lot. It also sounds incredibly boring. So when this is going on, does John try to find a new job? No. He doesn't. He instead starts stealing money from his mother's bank account to sustain the life that him and his family were living. And he was getting into money troubles. He was, I believe, about $11,000 behind on his mortgage for his home. And he was in danger of being foreclosed on because he lived in a freaking giant Victorian mansion in New Jersey. But no one cared about John's little sob story, and in October of 1990, he was found guilty of all 5 murders and sentenced to 5 consecutive life sentences. During John's sentencing, he still refused to take responsibility for what he did, and instead said, and I quote, "I feel that because of my mental state at the time, I was unaccountable for what happened. I ask all affected by this for their forgiveness, understanding, and prayer." The judge was unaffected by this declaration from John List, and at trial he said, and I quote again, "John Emile List will be eternally synonymous with concepts of selfishness, horror, and evil. He is a man that could coldly, calculatingly, and cunningly conceive and carry out a cowardly plan to assassinate each of his 3 children." He also said, "John Emile List is without remorse and without honor. After 18 years, 5 months, and 22 days, it is now time for the voices of Helen, Alma, Patricia, Frederick, and John F. List to rise from the grave." Mic drop. John List did spend the rest of his natural life in prison, and on March 21st, 2008, John List died in prison due to complications with pneumonia at the age of 82. And that, my friends, is the story of John List, the family annihilator who murdered his wife, his 3 children, and his mother because he was a loser and a coward. What do you think? I think John was just really tired of getting jobs and losing jobs and moving around and having to constantly tell the people in his life how he just like sucked at existing, and he just wanted to start over with a clean slate and no baggage. And John thought that the only way he could do this was by murdering his family under the guise of religious sanctuary, and that's just so sad. Like, the story is cool, you know, it's cool to see the way he was caught and the science behind it and the forensic and just how spot on the forensic sculptor was and how him and the forensic psychologist worked together in such a cool way. Like, that's fun and cool to talk about and discuss here. But the facts remain that this man murdered his entire family. The man that was supposed to love them and provide for them and protect them at all costs murdered them in their home, the place that they're supposed to be safe, by a person who's supposed to be protecting them, and then left their bodies to rot alone for a month with like creepy religious music playing, and then like prayed over them after the fact. So gross. All because he didn't want his family to have to live with the shame of losing their house and having to go on public assistance. And why didn't John List kill himself too, you may ask? Well, because he believed if he killed himself too, then he couldn't go to heaven and be reunited with his family. But apparently you can just like murder your family and then repent for your sins, and it's like all cool in God's eyes. That's bull. Okay, this man was a coward. This man just wanted a new life and a new existence without the baggage of a family, and he didn't want his reputation to be sullied, just like Chris Watts. These guys just make me sick. Like, just get a divorce. Get a divorce, start over, let the other people start over, let everyone try to have a fresh start. But no, that's too much for you, so you have to kill them. Whatever. Just give everyone a chance, not just you, but you know, that wouldn't do. But anyways, guys, that completes this video. I hope that it was interesting and informative and it gave you all the information that you would want on this case when looking into this case. And of course, I hope you enjoyed it, because that's very important to me that you enjoy the videos that I'm putting out for you. Please let me know of any cases you would like to see me cover in the future. I have a long ongoing list of cases to cover, but every time you leave a suggestion, I add it to my list because I know you're filled with good ideas and good suggestions and good taste. Otherwise, you would not be here. And of course, if you haven't already, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing the bell, because I put out a new Morbid makeup video every week and I wouldn't want you to miss it. And if you want to stay up to date with me more consistently, you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter. They are both BRATTERSTEIN, like my namesake here, and I'm on there quite a bit. And with all of that said, thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else on the internet. That's tight, this is tight, you're tight, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.